no one else had ever seen it. So.
Exactly how it'll go. If people want to read, yeah. But I'm gonna tell them, you know, what I can offer about it, you know.
Right.
Yeah.
I love that Canadian about.
Oh yeah. What's that?
We were trying to figure out how to influence Roy Tuckman to get you to do a live call-in show.
It's impossible.
Boy, he's really
Bob was talking about the...
My whole point, I'm more effective having you guys harass them. That gets the message across. You know, whatever.
But by 4 o'clock on Friday, the next day, the ACLU, they challenged it in federal court, and the government didn't challenge it. They acquiesced, and he got back in and did it.
Gee. Okay, well, what he said is that he retreated
It's really weird.
In what sense?
Didn't fight it.
Well, in one of these Magical Blend magazines, he did an article a few months ago saying that, it would seem a year ago, he retreated to Hawaii. He decided he was polluting too much by being on the lecture circuit and using airplanes. So he was developing, so he was using his web page to communicate. And he said he kind of dropped out and was going to use the web page. But this is...
I would say jet fuel.
But he would do a performance once in a while. But he wasn't lecturing anymore. He was going to communicate through the...
Okay, Bob, we're going to start.
Oh, well, nobody here. Okay, see it.
That's all right.
But okay, I know the way to do that.
Thanks a lot for coming to the Marcia McLuhan Finnegan's Wake Reading Club. And today I got a few announcements to start off with, and then we're going to have a special guest. One event that I highly encourage everyone checking out is over at the Midnight Special, August 20th. There's flyers in the back. There's also, if we run out of flyers, there's Change Links, which is a great newsletter that updates you with all the events, political and literary and all kinds of great events in LA. So you can pick up Change Links. Usually here, they always have them. They come out monthly. But this is Dr. DeAndrea. He's speaking at the Midnight Special on the diet riot, breaking the fast food syndrome. And last couple of months ago, Dr. D spoke on, I think there's anyone new. Oh, we have one person who I know. We usually talk about Marcia McLuhan for the first half hour, and then we read 2 pages from Finnegan's Wake and discuss that. And even though it's listed on our flyer for 6:30 starting time, we encourage you all to get here at 6 to sort of schmooze and get to know each other. And in that regard as well, we encourage you to join us afterwards from 8 to 10 usually. We go over to Kookaroo, which is the restaurant at Main and Rose, right over here in edge of Santa Monica and Venice. And we meet there for another 2 hours. So please join us after the meeting tonight. But in regards to the handout, it was really amazing because we've never had any pages that we've read. We've read up to page 17 now. But I found a McLuhan book from Cliché to Archetype where he actually talks about 2 pages in the Wake specifically. And those 2 pages are our next 2 pages that we'll be reading, pages 18 and 19. So please pick up a handout, and this page is from Marshall's book, Cliché to Archetype. Yes, and he discusses the 2 pages we'll be reading in September, which brings me to September, because September 2nd is actually Labor Day, and we won't be meeting. So this is not the first Monday of September we'll be meeting. We'll be meeting the 2nd Monday, and it's notated on your handout as well. The flip of the handout has an article hour of 6:30, so are we rolling there, Scott? Yeah.
And it's no problem, Scott, if I walk around in front here, you can turn? Yep.
Okay, my name is Gerry Fialka, and I started this reading club because this library opened up brand new, and I've been thinking about starting a Finnegan's Wake reading club because I was inspired by our guest, Bob Dobbs, who taught me there's a lot of connections between Marcia, McLuhan, and Finnegan's Wake. So I want to introduce Bob. He is Marcia McLuhan's main archivist, as well as being a Finnegan's Wake scholar. And to start off, if you read any of our flyers, there is a Marcia McLuhan quote from Newsweek that says, "Finnegan's Wake is the greatest guidebook to media study ever fashioned by man." So Bob, maybe you can just start out talking about why McLuhan's connected to the Wake.
Let's see, okay. They requested me to stand, and it's not that I want to intimidate, I prefer to sit. First, let me say about the Wake is I'm not going to give a long lecture. I'm going to make a couple of statements, and so it's similar to our previous thing. I'm a member of a Finnegan's Wake reading group in New York, so I'm used to this, and we want to make it participatory. Everybody, here comes everybody. Anybody can analyze the content. I'm going to give a view that deals with the forms of our time in relation to the form of Finnegan's Wake. So my opening statement, and I'll make this statement and see if there's any questions. And the statement will be hard to understand maybe, but it's something that we can whittle away at, as well as if you have any questions about any part of the book, feel free to ask me. I mean, I'm ready to go in any direction, and I don't want to make a lecture. This is your group. We should all share. I have some interesting views of this. I have access to rare material that I've studied for years, so that I have a unique, as Marshall said, used to say, I have a monopoly, a world monopoly on this situation, because I have access to information nobody else has. And it's thanks to Marshall. I consider this book really not a book. I think that James Joyce accomplished something that is phenomenal. In this sense, we've all heard of the efforts now to make new life forms, genetic engineering, cloning, and science in the 21st century will move into this if they haven't already made advances we don't know about. I think that the effort to make artificial intelligence, artificial life, was already accomplished by Joyce. I think this is an actual new life form. More than a book, it's a new life form. And he somehow, created it. And as you get to live with it more and get involved, you see that it's the closest artifact that approximates, that is artificial life. I don't know if it's first nature or, original life. I'm saying that this is artificial life and it's even life. Now, Marshall worked a bit on that level, and he said that Joyce manifested the living word. Now, Marshall's talking as a Catholic, but also as a metaphysician. Capital L, capital W. He manifested the living word. And I don't know if he would agree with me if I said this is a new life form, or the culmination of the whole enterprise to create life, and we may come up with it in some weird forms of the 21st century, but I think he successfully did it before everybody. Now, that's a strange, do you think this might be just a book? To say this is a life form and new nutrition for humans is a remarkable achievement. So that is my opening statement about what this is. Being a book is very minor in this situation. So, any response or question about what I just said or anything else?
Question. How would you exactly describe life?
That's a good question. I think for humans it's language. And language is not just verbal, any form of interaction between humans. And this table is a form of communication. So anything that humans make comes under the rubric of language. And it creates a means of sharing. So for humans, it's like the idea that objects are unobservable, but relationships between objects are observable. We can't see the thing that does the seeing. I can't see consciousness, but I can see seeing with you, interacting with you. It's a process between more than one thing. So the means, we share that process through language. Before verbal language, it was body language, gesture, or touch, or whatever form, whatever people did thousands of years ago. So life for humans, it's like the image in Leonardo da Vinci. You know, God's there and man is there holding his hand, and there's a gap, right? The gap is something that we may never bridge, but the picture itself is linguistic. It's the communication of what we're talking about.
So you would say that life is communicative.
Right.
Communicativeness.
Yeah, or communication, but communicativeness, if that has the right syllabic rhythm for you, yeah, that's what it is, communicativeness. So that, I think that he solves the communication problem. You know, it's a very interesting story about him. Bloom in Ulysses was his address, 7 Eccles Street, was the lifelong address of his buddy, childhood buddy. I can't remember his name, but you know, it's well known in Elman's book, this guy, I can't remember it right now, but this person who lived at 7 Eccles Street, so it's like Joyce writes a novel about Dublin and he has 7 Eccles Street as the key thing. People in the 20s did not know it was Joyce's buddy who stayed in Dublin, didn't go into silence, exile, and cunning like Joyce. He stayed home. But what did this person do? He spent his whole life creating a device that would confer perfect security on all communications between people and nations. And what was the device he came up with? A cigar box with bits of odds and ends. That's all it was. Okay, now Joyce makes a reference to that in the book here. So it's interesting. Joyce seemed to be carrying on a dialogue with this person. And this is Joyce's effort to confer security in all communications between people and groups and nations. Now, what did you say? Why did I bring that up?
I asked you how you define life. You said
Right.
it's like
New life.
And life.
Yeah, life.
I just want to know how you...
I guess I just thought an example of that, you know, this has Irish history in it, but it's not just Irish history. It's got many languages which evoke those words from different languages evoke different cultures. So I think it's neat to keep in mind his own autobiography and who he was, things he was making personal references to. And that's the fact. Did anybody know that fact? Has anybody ever read that? That Bloom was based on this guy who developed this device? Now, this fact missed Joyce scholars until David Wise, who did the book in The Invisible Government in the 60s. He did a book on the history of cryptography. And that little fact was in his book. I don't know if he was a Joyce scholar, but he knew this thing about Joyce's friend, and that's how one found out about it. But you had to read a book on cryptography, which is about communication. How much is hidden and how much is revealed. And it was through David Wise that we found out this fact.
Well, on your idea that life is communication, I know you know about Richard Dawkins and his memes.
Yes.
He wants life, biological life, to be characterized by replication, so that genes, which are the core of replication, have an analog in memes.
Yes.
Which for him are words, or book-length essays even are memes. And here's where I think it would all come together. You say life is communication, but after all, communication is a meme stream.
Yes.
A stream of memes replicating. So I just thought that would close that back together.
It does. I would say that both ideas, gene as something in biological nature, and is meme considered part of biology or part of human artifacts?
Well, it's metaphysical.
It's more word. It's more human communication. It's
Well,
more.
it's ideas.
Yeah.
It's insubstantial.
Right. So let's say ideas. Since we're in the gap between God and the human being who's there trying to touch but doesn't touch, so there's a resonant electrical interval. We could say that's the meme. If we emphasize biology, which is our image of first nature, the original biological nature, and the meme is second nature, or human artifacts and mirrors of first nature, I think that our images of the genes probably still work within our cultural conditioning. In other words, in 100 years we might discover some other way to look at the organization of the nucleic acids. New knowledge will come in. So our knowledge is always changing about biology, about first nature. So maybe it isn't genetic as the ground of it. So that's what's interesting. We're describing, if you think of God as biology, as something that's bigger in an environment we're living in, then no matter what, we're filtering our imagery of first nature. So I would say the genes would slip over into memes, and the meme gene in Finnegan's Wake is HCE&ALP, which goes all the way through the book. And that is, that's an imitation of the fact that science is beginning to find out that our cells contain information from back in the ape levels, or maybe even back to the dinosaur phase. So he's already imitating what genetic science has learned later. He did this in the 20s and 30s.
Well, I was thinking as you were talking about Alfred North White, it was one of my heroes many, many years ago, because he talked about process long before other people talked about it. And this is kind of an evolutionary step along that idea of process, because if this is a life form, and it is still in the process of evolving, because every time you look at it.
It's a life form that can change by our input.
Right.
Because I don't have...
because it's not just going one way, it's going back and forth.
That's the genius, which he learned from Mallarmé and the symbolists. The symbolists and Baudelaire realized the failure of the Romantic poetry movement. So they were sort of like the first Romantic movement. Then Baudelaire comes along with the second Romantic movement, where he said, the heck with nature, I got to deal with the new mechanical industrial environment. So they moved back into Paris, and they started to let the city speak to them, rather than Romantic going back to first nature. And they knew that no one individual could dominate the industrial environment. So many groups of people were working and doing some part, one factory and another factory, in agriculture, all these things. Bucky Fuller explains this. All these operations by humans, you have to rely on the bus driver and all these things to keep the society moving. The complexity moves in the new industrial environment. And therefore, one doesn't impose their vision on reality, on people. You know there's an ongoing dialogue. So that's why Mallarmé, who sort of crystallized the efforts of Baudelaire and Rimbaud and these guys before him, he wrote a poem by rolling dice. He took some letters and rolled them like dice, and whatever pattern formed, he put it on there, and then he left it to the participant, the audience, to interact and make a pattern out of it. So pattern making was what the symbolists broke through. Then Eliot, Pound, and Lewis, and Yeats, and Joyce, those five guys, they called the Men of 1914, they talked about this a lot among themselves. And the four voices, the four men, I don't know if you've got an overview, but the four men, the four evangelists, the four bedposts of HCE in the bed, that's Yeats, Pound, Lewis, and Eliot, and Joyce interacting. So the four voices are four of them commenting on the fifth person, and the fifth person role changes. So now your question was the participant, all right, the process. Now, that would come to the next thing, is that I consider the HCE and ALP as isomorphic. The same form, or as Marc said to me last night, what is the line? The same told of all?
It's the same told of all.
Yeah, that's the isomorphic part of our mind and our culture. We always have the same pattern repeating, but we know that the conditions that the pattern works in are always changing. In other words, I'm Baudelaire telling you the truth of what he discovered, and you're humans interacting with me. And that's Baudelaire. Now I'm doing it, 125 years later. It's still a person talking to people. But look at the difference. He got a camera, he had a little salon, maybe he took some drugs, the whole scene of Bohemia in Paris. It's different. But there's the isomorphic, repeating attempt of somebody trying to update the dialect of the tribe, to quote Eliot. The poet updates the previous maxim was the poet is the true legislator of the world. So Eliot comes along and says the poet updates the dialect of the tribe. So I'm trying to update this tribe right to this point, repeating what Baudelaire did. So I'm repeating that function, which is ongoing, but there's another level, the metamorphoses level. So Finnegan's Wake has the repeating HC and ALP, but HC and ALP are in different situations, therefore their costumes change, or their sociological reference points change. So you get two tracks going on in consciousness, private and collective, is the repeating isomorphic. You know what isomorphic is, the same form. But that's more I-oriented. You see this image and you see the symmetry of it. But speech and other sensory things like movement and kinetic space, which was improved with the Industrial Revolution, they started to go in carriages and then later cars. That's the changing social ground which is influencing the isomorphic factor, but it creates different clothes for the isomorphic. Now the 10 thunders of Finnegans Wake, you're all aware of at least thunder on page 3, the first page. Well, there's 10 of those in the book. Anybody not familiar with the thunders? Right, there's 10 of them in the book. And if you add them up, you add up the number of letters. Each one has 100 letters. But the 10th one has 101 letters. But Joyce says underneath it, within the dialogue, he goes, the 100-lettered name again. But it's actually 101 letters. So 10 100-lettered thunder words adds up to 1001, which is a repeating motif or isomorphic form, the Arabian Nights stories, the 1001 stories. All right? So each letter, as Joyce is known to have said, each letter is a godsend. So he's got 1001 letters, and each one of them can be a vortex to become a whole story. So the 10 thunders are the guide to the changes that are happening within the book and through the book, the process. And if you, for example, Thunder 7, both all co-actors, has a whole description of a dadaistic, surrealistic radio apparatus embedded all around the pages leading up to the thunder on page 314. So you know that he's referring to the radio era. All right? So HC and ALP adopt a different costume during the radio era as opposed to the newspaper era and the printed book era. All right? So there's the guide. What Marshall hit on was the metamorphic thing. Marshall McLuhan discovered that the metamorphic stream was keyed and signified by the changes in the thunders and what the thunders indicated. And the isomorphic is what Joseph Campbell worked on. The repeating myths, the quest of the hero, that repeating thing in all cultures, Jungian archetypes, is the thing that repeats, and that's isomorphic. So the process is half the story, but it's a very important half. Next. Let's say that the act of speech has archetypal intensity. Whatever, an epiphany, or it's something that is common and yet is very significant. So you take the cliche of speech and make it archetype. And then Marshall develops that into that all previous archetypes flip and become cliches to be brought back again later as archetypes. And basically that's what Joyce does. He takes all the cliches of languages and the archetypes of Western culture and other cultures, but mainly West, and he's playing back and forth between the cliches of popular culture and the archetypes of book culture like Shakespeare or Dante.
What do you mean by cliche?
I'd say it's the comfort that you feel in this room caused by chairs that you're taking for granted.
The cliche is the comfort that I feel.
The effects of the chairs. We're not talking about the chairs in this room, we're talking about this. But the linguistic communication that's sort of organizing it and making it comfortable for us is the chairs here. So they're the cliche environment. Like air, oxygen is a cliche environment. Now if you start to draw attention to it, that's when you're turning it into, from the ordinary taken for granted, to archetypal or significance, isolated significance. That's archetypal. Does that make sense? Well, what do you think the cliche is?
Well, applied linguistically, I guess a cliche would be a word or a phrase whose meaning is taken for granted or assumed by everyone to be known.
I understand you.
If I use the cliche,
America the Beautiful.
America the Beautiful,
Yeah.
or Bats and Belfry,
Yeah.
or Great Apple Pie, something like that. I assume that you're thinking exactly the same
Right.
set of images and so forth.
Things are taken for granted.
Right.
You agree with that phrase, taken for granted. But
And yeah, probably if we examine what you think apple pie is, what I think apple pie
Right.
is, we come up with some different.
different individual brain content or subjectivity.
Okay, what would flip apple pie over from being cliche into an art?
Pop art. Rauschenberg. He takes a painting of a pie and puts it in a museum. That's an archetypal institution. It represents high cultural values. Or another example is, the soup can. This cliche thing that most people think is just factory food. How could it relate to the traditional high art values that come out of our 19th century legacy? That's why he shocked people. Warhol put the soup can, the cliche, and put it in an old environment or an archetypalizing environment. But to go back to this thing about your notion of cliche is a cliche notion, because that's the idea that language, you're taking the normal meaning of cliche. The cliche meaning it refers to verbal statements that are well known. So,
Well, it also refers to images too.
right, verbal images. I'm saying Joyce developed, updated, and expanded the notion of cliche by pointing out that our environment is a cliche thing. And that's where you get the idea that chairs are linguistic. If you think of verbs as speech as cliches, let's expand it and see that these are utterances of our situation. We have made these things, they're extensions of us like speeches. Now to prove my point, look at the first line. If you think of the environment as a cliche, the first line of the book is, brings us, brings us by a commodious vicus of recirculation back to Howth Castle and environs, capitalized. And that's HCE. The castle, which is an actual artifact in Dublin, is that, but what's the environs of Howth Castle? Dublin itself, or whatever, or the whole island of Ireland. The point is he's pointing out that, first of all, Howth Castle was a cliche for generations of Dubliners, but he's also pointing out the environs are cliche too. So it's an expanded notion of cliche. I think that, see, if you understand what I mean, then you can, whether you agree with me or not, but you get the point I'm saying, that the chairs are a cliche environment.
Well, okay,
hold on, what? Go
I
ahead.
just think there are a couple of definitions floating around in there somehow. Probably one is Marcia McLuhan's.
Oh yeah, definitely. Well, Marshall remember, Marshall's famous book, he won the Canadian Governor General's Award, the Gutenberg Galaxy, the subtitle of it that he never got published was The Road to Finnegan's Wake. He was in all his work describing Finnegan's Wake. That's what he was talking about. But he didn't just make up these notions and project them into Finnegan's Wake. He luckily met James Joyce's main protagonist, intellectual protagonist, Wyndham Lewis. They both were born in 1882, so they're Shem and Sean, they're twins. And Lewis was the first person in the late 20s to critique the rising popularity of Joyce and Ulysses and the whole philosophy of Einstein and Bergson. And Joyce, they were friends, but Joyce was irritated by that. And so from that point on, they're arguing with each other through their essays and other substitute people who do statements for Joyce if Joyce is not available. You can see that argument go from 27 up to 39. That's why you'll find out later that it's a cliche in Joyce studies that the the parable of the ant and the grasshopper around page 415 to 419, the ant is Lewis and Joyce is the grasshopper. And there's definite references in that section to Lewis books. So Marshall met Lewis as a professor in St. Louis, Missouri, is it?
Yeah.
St. Louis, Missouri. And Lewis told him what was really going on, which was not available to a young academic in the 40s because Lewis was suppressed in the 30s. His books were done away with because he wrote a book sort of supporting Hitler in 1931. He repented on that by 1939. But Lewis was not, for someone who's just getting into school and young professor of 30s and 40s, he would have heard of Lewis, but it was hard to get his literature. Plus it was hard to even, where was he? So coincidence led that he met Lewis, and Lewis turned him on to these notions. So it's not just Marshall's improvisation out of his own mind. There's a legacy that comes through the battle and the dialogue and the debate between Joyce and Lewis. And there's a great book I mentioned in this second essay, no, the first essay, Up the Orphic Ante, by a professor in England, Dennis Brown, who it's called The Literary Dynamics of the Group Dynamics of the Literary Group. And he spells out academically how Yeats, Pound, Lewis, and Joyce were really influenced by Lewis more than scholars ever recognized. And that, okay, so I granted that this is maybe a semantic game, but that's the nature of communication life. I'm not saying this is the rules or the laws or the ultimate breakthrough. I'm offering ways to look at this thing that requires interpretation and adjustment to by me in readjusting to your adjustment to it, right? So it's a playfulness, which is what this book is. I mean, Huizinga, the philosopher, wrote a book on Homo ludens. Man is essentially, humans are essentially playful. That's what culture is. This is the most playful book, that absurd, playful, and serious book you'll ever come across. So he's pointing out the playfulness, so you got to be playful towards this. So in a sense, he took the cliche of playfulness and made it an archetype, which made everybody very serious about it. Which is a joke, which is Joycean joke.
In other words, I'm to interpret what you're saying is cliches are influenced by modernity. Huh?
Right. That language adjusts. Yeah. Where did the cliche to where it's at? New phrase at some point in the 60s, then it becomes cliche.
Yeah.
And where it's at, if you look at it, says when you bring in television and information overload in the 50s and 60s, nobody knew where the center of culture was anymore. So language almost of itself told the humans to go, we're looking for where it's at, you know, and it had meaning. If you said where it's at in 1833, you'd be arrested maybe, you know what I mean? Or you put in a mental asylum if you made a big issue out of it. But the culture changed, the metamorphosis, the ground of the culture of urban modernity changed, so the people's sensibilities, registered in language, which is the interval between humans, revealed a new rhythm, a new phrase.
Way in the back.
Next, anybody?
Well, I was objecting to your use of air and chairs as cliches. No way.
No way based on what school of thought, though?
Cliche has to do with ideas, thoughts.
Right.
It's not these instruments or air, which is absolutely essential for our survival. It's not a cliche.
Okay, are you willing to look at an interpretation of cliche as I presented, or you say, no, we don't want to deal with that interpretation?
Commonly shared ideas that don't have to be explicitly stated, yeah, I go along, but they're ideas. They're not chairs, physical objects of air.
Well, how about the fact that you see more chairs on TV as an image than you do in reality, because you're seeing so many simulated environments and imagery of chairs, that may affect us, that may start to make objects imagery which is more closer to words. Closer to words is when things become imagery or software, because word is more soft than a chair or a hammer. So in our environment, electric environment, we're bombarded by and engaged with imagery, software, things start to get less hard because we see more of it through imagery. That's a suggestion to look at how maybe it would change. Okay? Yeah, all right. This is Kyle.
Yeah, earlier you said that Finnegan's Wake is
Right.
How does Finnegan's Wake do that?
Right. Well, I think that he hit on the strange notion of not trying to be a dictator, cultural or political, and impose on people. He allowed everybody, here comes everybody, to participate in it. You don't know what any of these things mean. You'll never know. But there are all kinds of possibilities what it means. And then there's the process of it's a mirror of you trying to find meaning. So it sort of makes everybody admit that they're nobody, or they don't know anything. So it starts everybody at square one. That's a democratic impulse, and that might confer security on communications if people acknowledge their limitations. And you can understand why up to the 20th century, people would be monoculturists or confined by the hypnotism of the culture because they only had their own local cultural experience. When you have all these cultures, especially now, interacting, it's not a monocultural reality, it's a pluriculturalism. So how are we going to talk in that situation? Definitely, you are not as conditioned by the culture you grew up in because you're immediately interacting. A child is interacting. So he is showing you the coming process, which we now, 100 years later, is what we're doing. So I just want to say something about, look at this, the title, Finnegan's Wake. That is a cliche song. It's a familiar song in Irish culture. He took this little song and said, it tells you everything about the history of man and all knowledge and everything that ever happened resonates out of Finnegan's Wake. And he kept it a secret while writing the book. Didn't tell anybody. Only 2 people guessed it. But the thing is that that's a cliche made into archetype. He's saying this one song tells me the whole story of humanity. That's cliched archetype. But it doesn't mean but then that archetype, a song, flips back into cliche because a new song comes along on the radio. And he was listening to radio in the 20s and 30s. Okay? So any song can be a cliche. So you move out of the interpretation of this as just this particular song. Once you get familiar of the cliched archetype flipping back and forth, you realize he's talking about song itself. And a song is something to be heard, but it's inside a book. There's another joke. It's a book about music, but you can't hear it.
I was thinking about the idea of cliche and archetype because that really is very important.
Yeah.
And it seems to me that you can have images as cliches very easily because everything that we see and do and touch is an idea that has language. So that you can't say because air, say for instance that example, air, because it's something that's necessary for life, can't be made into a cliche or be part of the cliche dependent upon the structure that it's put in or the context.
Okay, so you're agreeing with me?
I'm agreeing with you.
Well, we don't want agreement here.
But I have to. But I can't exactly picture how the cliche flips back and forth in the archetype, except in the context, within context.
That's where did you want to supplement her or go into another topic? Okay.
Yeah, well, the greatest source of titles for screenwriters is a cliche book. Is a book of cliches. Yeah. And then they take a cliche and then they amplify it, but they enlist, an audience in a cliched kind of broad spectrum, and then they amplify it into more of they put it into a different perspective, or a different...
Yeah, but that doesn't...
To me, that's an idea of taking a cliche and turning it into an archetype.
The archetypal movie experience, a particular medium.
A title.
Yeah.
That a screenwriter who doesn't want to write a cliche.
Right.
Obviously.
He wants to archetypalize it.
Oh, that's right. So
yeah.
His intention is to create an archetypal piece creation, but he goes to a cliche.
The storehouse of language. He goes to the human storehouse of speech.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And the best storehouse of that are cliches.
That's right.
But that doesn't necessarily because he intends to make an archetype. I mean, the idea of archetype and cliche is very personal, very subjective.
That's another.
Yeah.
Well, that's what Jung developed the archetypes in subjective consciousness and sort of saw the patterns and related to culture. But that's the point that Joyce and them, they went post-Jungian. Their idea of archetype and cliches were the environs. They didn't think it was some archetypes in the brain.
No, I'm not talking.
So it's not personal.
I mean, that isn't what I meant.
Okay.
But an archetype and a cliche, I mean, it's almost like a flip, and it depends on the moment or the exact
The context.
context
Yes.
in order to be determined. And you can have a picture that somebody wants to make an archetype of, they pick a cliche to title it to do that, but it may never become. I mean,
May not be shared, part of the collective. Yeah, that's now.
Talent.
Right.
But I mean, so that's.
I want to say context. It's the context. That is another meaning for the word medium. The context is the message.
And it is the environment.
Right, the context.
Right.
So the 10 thunders are 10 historical contexts. And he shows how the cliche of Finnegan's Wake in the songs, or HC and LP and their family, how they adopt different situations. That's the cliche archetype process, and she's right, within the context. And the context changes. Marc?
Yeah, it seems like one of the missing from this discussion of cliche is that cliche also can be an acceptable or comfortable or culturally enforced either mode of expression or a phrase of language or a mode of, it could be anything from like dressing or like we said, sitting in a chair, or right now, breathing without a filter or an oxygen tank is something that we all think of as, you know, that's the way it is. But that may not be the way it is 100 years from now, and maybe this may be a cliche of, it's so good there you can breathe without an oxygen tank. That may be a cliche 100 years from now. Okay? Cliches are things that are comfortable to us. They're acceptable modes of our expression in that sense. Like
Now, Marc, 100 years from now, the environment that they have will be cliche.
Yeah, exactly. But my point being that whereas certain things to us are culturally accepted or expected or enforced, like sitting in a chair, or in some other cultures, sitting in a chair is a huge affront to nature. You should want to sit on the ground.
Yeah, the homeless don't have chairs.
Right, exactly. So, but the place where the cliche transfers to archetype, like a classic example we studied from the 60s, like that phrase, all you need is love. So that reached everybody who spoke English or did whatever, but because the thing that was created for was this world broadcast, they went and translated it into like 70-some different languages and had people walking around the studio with it in its own side so that the cultural content would be overcome so that in whatever language that someone could understand it, the archetype of what he was trying to say there, that what we really want is this nurturing beauty connection thing that reached out and touched people. It wasn't just so much the phrase was so small and digestible and repeatable, but when it went beyond just the form itself, it went to some essence that it was touching in that seemed to spread through people. That's when it reaches the archetype.
Right, it's archetype, but what's the new cliche in that situation? It's the television environment that's broadcasting it.
There's no question there's always going to be a new cliche. But we often use cliches in communicating when something is hard to explain. So we want to draw upon something that brings some other type of cultural backlog of consciousness with it into the situation. Like if I said, Finnegan's Wake, can't judge a book by its cover. You know? That's a good cliche, but it becomes an archetype because it looks just like every other book from its cover when you get inside, and now all of a sudden we have a new archetype.
That's right.
But at the same time, with life, we were talking about before, what is life? And I think one of the things that's missing from this is like, Phil tried to bring the idea of replicate to it, the reproducing nature of life. And I think that life, in a sense, is a complete and whole and individuated expression of the life force, which in its own essence uses the tools it has available, beauty and pain and pleasure and all those other things, in order to reproduce itself. Certainly, Finnegan's Wake has been very successful in its own entity in creating a new type of beauty, in creating a new type of light that's shed out and situated, that some people find very beautiful and very attractive, and they're drawn to it, like the people in this room. So we sit here and spend time reproducing thoughts about Finnegan's Wake. Some of them are novel and some are not. And when we have a novel thought and we're trying to relate it to somebody else, and we can't find a way to do it with a direct expression, we reach for a cliche that will maybe give a beginning of this new meaning that we're perceiving on the situation, trying to reach to an archetypal expression. But there's something in that life form of Finnegan's Wake itself that, in its way of bringing beauty, in its way of bringing its true essence out forward, causes us to see something about ourselves. We realize that this book has some type of life and some type of consciousness. Because life ultimately, to the existentialists who follow the symbolists, is consciousness. And that consciousness now, the scientists have gone started saying it's light. So it's light, it's life, it's energy, it's consciousness. And certainly Finnegan's Wake has a lot of consciousness in it. So there's something in that consciousness that attracts us and causes it to be a source for new life. Now,
For archetypal experience.
right, and people have taken cliches out of Finnegan's Wake and given them a whole life unto themselves just because it worked for them. It was a convenient source of cliche. At the same time, you'll never find a better book of in-jokes with which to hide your meaning than Finnegan's Wake. So that explains how
That's
Finnegan's
life.
has a black box.
That's life. It's always hiding, you know. You never know the meanings that are being communicated in the present.
Right. Well, like I said, if I said you can't judge a book by its cover, I could have also said appearances are deceiving. There might be more there than you see at first glance. That doesn't say as much as quickly as it does not can't judge a book by its cover.
Okay, who's been waiting the longest? You haven't had a chance.
I was just thinking about the relationship to unconscious and conscious thought processes as it relates to the archetype, which is so.
Right.
I mean, it seems to me that at least, well, what do I know? I've only been for 25 years, but in that time, it seems that the archetype existing on a conscious level is very much suppressed, and the archetype existing on an unconscious level is very much amplified.
Right.
And that, if anything, that in this process engages us to take the archetype or the cliche, bring it up into the consciousness, examine it.
Yes.
Where it has, then that obviously will change its meaning, that we're just passively letting it act upon us without
Right.
taking it to an active level. And that's another thing about what the Wake does, is where every other book, we just passively read it and accept it, or even if we disagree. It's
The meaning becomes obvious. It puts you, remember Joyce's line, my producers, are they not my consumers? So he said, you will be the person to create meaning, and yet he had his meanings, but it's not a passive activity with this book, is what your point. Now, I just want to say, remember, here's the way, an easy way to look at the form. I'm talking the form of the book, not the meanings. The meanings have been put together by Roland McHugh, who for 30 years scanned the scholars who were looking in detail at each word and finding its derivative that seemed to be there. So you people will be excavating the book and finding meanings. Now there's new meanings you'll find, but a lot of it's been done by this book. So if I want to read a page of this, I just need to read the meanings. They've already done the work on that level, and they'll have many more meanings than I could find in my lifetime.
But it also echoes life as far as we're very conditioned to think of one thing has one meaning, as opposed to the multi-layered,
Right.
which is more an accurate portrayal of the complexity of things.
And of the collective unconscious and the personal unconscious. Now, when you bring in the form, you say, Joyce, he's sitting in Paris in the 20s and 30s, and he's listening on shortwave radio, which is new technology there, a new medium, and he's hearing Dublin. And the voices that he ran away from or hid from for whatever reasons, he can hear them. They're in his room. So he's back in Dublin, so to speak. He also can hear every other culture in Europe broadcasting. So any page of Finnegan's Wake is originally, for Joyce's reference point, the radio environment that he experienced. He painted the environment of his day, of the present he was living in. And he saw that how could I paint the radio? Well, take a page and have languages from different kinds of languages in collage form. Now, as he worked on this, and he wrote many versions and erased and changed, adapted constantly, many of the collages were changed, but you can see after 17 years, he could organize it. And he probably learned from the experience of organizing it what media do, because radio put speech into a new context. So the unconscious was the radio environment, and everybody was wondering what Hitler or Roosevelt was saying, and not knowing how the whole cliche situation was changed by the new cliche, the new unknown cliche effect of radio, therefore retrieving archetypal experiences like Hitler and Mussolini retrieving tribal historical bonds of their culture. Mussolini wanted to retrieve Rome, and Hitler retrieved the tribal thing of Germany. And those were tribal responses inside this global, it's like post-tribal situation of radio. So he was trying to paint a statement on the unconscious factors, and that was post-Jung and post-Freud. Yeah.
You could never translate Finnegan's Wake into Russian, though.
Well, you can translate it.
Because he made a comment on it one time, sitting in a cafe, remember?
Yeah.
Two kids come over to him, want to have his approval of translating
Right.
essays, and his agent said, "Don't let him." He said, "Go ahead, they'll never understand it."
Yeah. No, that's...
So the cliches only apply to me.
That's...
Am I?
Yes. Here's the thing, though, that Finnegan's Wake, on that point, cannot be translated into any language. Can it be translated into English? This is an attempt to translate it into English. Yeah. And so, many scholars, like Fritz Zen, a famous Joyce scholar, He just put a book out a couple of years ago, and he says, I've worked on this book for 40, 50 years, and I give up. It doesn't mean anything.
Right.
Okay? What he's doing, he's looking at the content, trying to find what word, what English idea or word or meme to say, that's what it is. Case closed. It's all about Russia, the Crimean War or something. But he's missing the formal of it, which was the genius of McLuhan, to say, wait a minute, he's trying to paint the present, the forms of communication, the new context. If you get that point, you can relax about the meanings, and you can enjoy them. You can surf back and forth like the mind is, from gene to meme.
Did you read the letter that he got from Casey in England? He writes him a letter.
Edgar Casey wrote Joyce a letter?
Yeah, congratulate him on a great book that he wrote.
I wasn't aware of that.
He says to him,
yeah?
what does it all mean?
and Casey's going into trance. They should have asked him what the heck does the Finnegan's Wake mean, you know, when he was in trance, and Spirit could have told him.
3 volumes of his letters.
Oh, that's you ought to bring Gerry a Xerox of that particular letter, because that's something to circulate.
See, what does it all mean?
A Joyce scholar, the literate, what Marcia called POBs, the print-oriented bastards, they were studying this with a book in mind. They wouldn't have anything to do with Casey, and they wouldn't know that. So I was not informed of this, and I'm angry. But so
There's one way in the back. Again, did you have one?
No, not now.
okay, Charles.
So I've been using the word cliche for the past several years because I usually sit in boardwalk in front of a coffee store, and acquaintances are forever hitting me with cliches. So when they keep repeating themselves, I say, I thought I told you I don't answer cliches. You know, like what's happening?
Yeah.
And they stand there with a stupid look in their face, as though I'm supposed to say something about what I'm doing.
Now that's the drama of cognition and the drama of life and of communications. Humans are always readjusting themselves to a meaning that's been established. Humans naturally want a new meaning the next day. So they don't like things repeated. But, well, I develop a new appreciation of cliches because humans are cliches and they will continue to be. So I would say, let's respond to that cliche with a cliche response that doesn't fit the context. What's happening, you could say, no, what would you say? You said one. What was that cliche you said? No, that's still... What? Yeah. He goes, what's happening? Can't judge a book by its cover. Where's the book, you know, that you're referring to? Okay, problem solved?
That revolutionizes phatic communion.
Right, the phatic communication is the key thing that McLuhan made a lot out of. Malinowski and anthropology. You have to understand that Joyce and them were, you know, professors manqués. You know, they were outlaws in academia. They studied everything. They read everything. At least, you know, they were curious. They wanted to find out what was going on. And so they weren't specialists. And this is actually a portrait of a guy who didn't specialize. You know, it creates a jumbled mind. Portrait of the artist is an old man. You know what I mean? But so they knew of Malinowski, who was an anthropologist who decided that the communications and cultures. If you look up the word phatic now in the dictionary, it's defined as communication of general sociability. So when you're at work and you walk down the corridor and you say to somebody, how you doing? They don't say, well, I went over there and then I had a doctor's report. They just say back to you, how you doing? And you don't take the statement literally, but it's a form of acknowledging the person. So it's a communication of general sociability. It's a communication that doesn't have content to be responded to verbally. That's phatic communication. And Malinowski, as an anthropologist, made a big deal out of this in anthropological context. This is about phatic communication in a certain. It's collective phatic communication that he had access through to radio because it was coming in at him all the time. And I think the greatest exemplar of phatic communication today that is confusing everybody is Bill Clinton. Because whatever, you know, there's the sign. He asks him a question, you go, whatever. But what he's doing, he's doing phatic communication, which is what you do when you have information overload. If you've ever taken drugs and everybody's on drugs, you keep the communication real simple. And it becomes archetypal even then. So you say hello and they'll spin off, oh yes, the galaxies and everything. You know, God has spoken. So you keep it real simple. So when you're dealing with an information overload environment, which is what happens when you do drugs, you resort to phatic communion. Now anyways, a song. Yes.
See what Charles was indicating in his cliche situation is a situation where cliches are only comforting within a shared culture. And when somebody come up to him and say what's happening, he looks at him and goes, you're not part of my culture, this is not comforting. You know?
Okay, now that's... and Marshall uses the term not cliche. He has the book you're going to bring in, or From Cliche to Archetype is the title. And he says, ye old cliche becomes new archetype, while ye old archetype becomes new cliche. So there's a flipping back and forth. So whatever happened in the 80s that destroyed the context for Russians, it changed them. So their cultural framework says, well, we were Russians. We're not Russians anymore. Why were we Russians? But they're all under the impact of the global new language that's affecting them, the satellite computer world. That is the new cliche environment that's mutating them. But humans always walk through history looking in the rearview mirror, so they keep sort of puzzling about why did we accept Stalin? Just like the Germans said, why did we accept Hitler? But radio made them accept it.
I think Shakespearean cliches probably are universal. He said you have to be a shared culture.
Yeah.
I don't think anything that Shakespeare would say that wouldn't be totally appreciated by anybody that hears it and understood it. So I don't think you have to be a limited culture to understand cliches. Oscar Wilde said, I can resist everything but temptation. I think everybody would appreciate that if they heard it.
Oh, you're talking about how, well, now you're getting the isomorphic.
Yeah,
that's the HCALP that's common in every culture.
Yeah, but that's a cliche.
That's a cliche.
Well, in my mind.
Yeah, it is. Yeah, isomorphic is cliche as well as metamorphic.
Shakespeare is no longer a cliche. It's only the fact that his statements became archetypal, that they became accepted and crossed cultural boundaries.
And then Shakespeare fades out and something else comes in, and then something retrieves them.
Right, it's like we might say we can't judge a book by its cover, and maybe 50 years from now we can't judge a CD ROM by its case, you know?
Yeah. So this process, we're communicating, this, what's called the drama of cognition, the drama of understanding what I'm saying, what you're saying back to me, that is imitated. That is mimed in mimetic form in this book. That's why it's constantly dialogues. And it's not really, the content's important, but on the other level, he's pointing out the dialogue that's going on between all these different means of communication. So you see what I'm saying? How to look at the form of it. Yes?
I just wanted to add that Samuel Beckett wrote in that mode.
Yes.
You know, how are you doing? It looks like it's going to rain. And for a lot of people it's confusing, but if you sort of just got into that modality.
Didn't follow the content. He's showing you speech as an archetype.
Right, exactly.
Yeah. Now here's what's interesting about Beckett. This new book I recommended by Dennis Brown is that Beckett, being a friend of Joyce's, and may have caused Joyce's daughter to go nuts because he spurned her romantic inclinations toward him, right? There's a whole drama between Joyce and Beckett. So after World War II, Beckett, he understood the wake as much as he did, and he wrote an essay on it and all this. What did Beckett do? He said Joyce had done it because Beckett knew this was theatrical too, because it has all media in it, so it's theater. So what did he do? He says nobody knows about Lewis. So he was inspired by Lewis and went back to Lewis's first presentation in 1914 called The Enemy of the Stars. Now that would be appropriate in the 50s. You have Hollywood and star culture imperialistically bombarding Europe and everywhere, right? So he retrieved Lewis. And because Lewis was censored, he said, Lewis's attitude is what I can mine because Joyce is already done and well known. And this book spells that out. The influence of Wyndham Lewis on Beckett, and I know no one in this room has ever heard of that idea, and anybody you go to in American culture. But that's what happened. What? Did you want to say something? You nodding. Okay. Michael.
What is this phrase you're using, the AC, NLP? What is that?
Have you been in any meetings? You know, that's here comes Humphrey Chimpton Earworker is the main man in the book. And ALP is Anna Olivia Pluribel. Have you been to many meetings? Have you been to many meetings? Here?
No, I haven't.
Oh, so you don't even know what we're talking about. What?
This is only my second.
Yeah, so he hasn't been here enough to know this. You all know that HC is the man and ALP is the woman. And you put them together, it spells chapel. You know, that's what's interesting. And it becomes a structure, an environment. Who went, geez? No? Are you getting an insight? Yes?
Comment on something you said a few minutes ago. You said that we were communicating, therefore understanding each other, that process was mirrored in the book.
No, not understanding. We're attempting to understand and adjusting to each other.
I see the book as progressing through a whole series of misunderstandings.
Right, which is part of the drama of cognition.
So attempting to communicate, saying something and then misunderstood by the next part.
Yeah. The drama of cognition is the constant paying attention and assuming meaning is being exchanged, and then finding out later it's not been interpreted that way, which is a cliche experience every human has. You take that cliche fact of communication, the drama of cognition, because you are looking at me now to see, is this guy crazy? You know, that's one thing, or is he a genius, or what? There's always this categorizing process going on, which is natural. But there's other things happening here that are affecting, and you'll adjust to a certain response to me at one point, and then it shifts. That shifting, or the drama of cognition, of where is this leading, is, and to do, in other words, he had to make a book that didn't have a precise meaning, so he could show the live process and drama of interaction. Oh, well, okay, yes?
I just wanted to make a parenthetical comment, which I think is probably appropriate in this room. About a week ago, I heard Roland McHugh speak for about an hour and a half in Dublin on the writing of that book.
What's the date? Was it part of Bloomsday? No,
It was James Joyce Summer School.
Oh, that's great.
Right, but I just want you to know two things. One is that of all the various speakers, the high concentration and absolutely the hot book amongst the scholars and people there is Finnegan's Wake. It's definitely.
Oh, you mean among Joyce scholars?
Yes.
Yeah. More than 30 years ago.
Oh, much more.
It's come into its time now, yeah.
Absolutely, the scholars are all really, really hyped. But anyway, Roland McHugh managed to make an obsession as big as his still sound charming and amusing. You know,
I didn't hear what you said.
An obsession as long as his in writing that book.
Yeah.
He spent his whole lecture just talking about how we went through this.
Which
and he managed to stay amusing because obviously the obsession is complete. You know?
Right, and he wrote a book. That would be an enlargement on his book done 20 years ago, The Finnegan's Wake Experience, which he talks about interacting with the Joyce groups and getting alienated and going off by himself. Do you have some new pattern that he's told you about?
Well, I mean, no, he was just talking about the writing of the book, and now he's having trouble getting the publisher, I forget, it was Johns Hopkins, to come out with, you know, the revisions that he's got finished, and so no one.
It means they don't want any more.
Right, they don't want to print anymore, but nowhere in Dublin could put all of the scholars running around the school, or the students there, they couldn't find this book, the way you have it.
You mean they're not even distributing? They're not even distributing it.
Right, and so
See,
anyway,
well, maybe this is
everybody was looking for that book.
So maybe because the Finnegan's Wake starts to become popular, the potent information in it, the revelation, the conferring of security on the human communications, maybe the establishment doesn't want it to become that popular.
Maybe, I think it's probably more coincidental.
Right. Is anybody else who hasn't had a chance to talk?
Yeah, more mundane. You were talking about the fact that Finnegan's Wake can't be translated, not even into English. I was curious, how is the book studied in places like China or India?
It is, believe me, there was a Korean.
I know, how is it?
They translate it into English.
On that note, I have a joke.
They take Campbell, say, the Skeleton Key, and they pretend there's an English ground to it. So they simplify it into English, then they take the English and translate it into Chinese.
Boy, who knows how fucked up that.
Yeah. Well, I met the guy who. Do you know, I was at the James Joyce Society in New York, and the Chinese guy who translated Ulysses, he gave a talk just within the last year. And we all were there, and these are informed people, and after we listened to the guy, we realized, this is James Joyce, trying to describe the present. He actually was the most vivid explanation of Ulysses, just in the act of the problem of taking cross-cultural communication. That's what struck me, that it took a Chinese guy who didn't know anything. That's what Joyce is telling us. He's Chinese.
Did you hear what the French writer said when he read Finnegan's Wake, what he thought it was?
What?
It was a ship going in with the wake. That's what he thought it was.
Yeah, he thought it was a ship in the wake, right? Which is an image that he simplified, and he's right. He's 1/1000th right. That image is in the title. It's a ship of reality moving ahead, and the wake is humans trying to translate it. But
you didn't understand a wake in the Irish.
Okay, you see, that's the conferring of security. That's the participatory thing. Everybody can get into the act. What a great way to get everybody democratically involved. Create something that can't be understood that somehow hypnotizes you to get involved, because you can't just say, everybody understand this. You've got to have some way to seduce them.
Yeah, but you can't have an interpretation that's completely not relevant to what the man was writing, can you?
Yeah.
Of course you can. I guess so.
Yeah, and then you become cultural differences. And so he confers security by actually causing a bloody Armageddon breakout among all the cultural translators, and they go, oh, look what we've done. Then they calm down. So this may be a means to an end beyond Finnegan's Wake. Yeah.
So anyhow, I just want to ask this question about how they say in Chinese. Remind me of a certain joke. We didn't have our joke period. So what do you call somebody who speaks 2 languages?
A negentropist.
Bilingual.
What? Bilingual? Oh.
Somebody speaks 3 languages?
Trilingual. Lingual.
How about somebody who speaks 1 language?
Fanatic.
American. See, now that explains how people study the wake and how maybe we have a harder time as Americans studying the wake.
But you know,
people around the world learn English.
But Mark, here's where I'd say Americans are, and Lewis wrote a book in 1948, American Cosmic Man. And he said America was the hope of the future because it had the most advanced cross-cultural pollination, the melting pot idea. So that, remember that there's a whole American metaphor parallel. The first page refers to Dublin in Georgia. You know what I mean? He was writing about America. But Mark, let me just finish the point. I'm saying that Americans are the most qualified to understand James Joyce because they live in the most avant-garde environment. They deal with cultural confusion constantly with new media or advertising. It's just that those who are most involved in an environment, like fish, don't know they're in water. So you had to take an old-fashioned guy like Joyce who hated the 20th century on a certain level, says, you Americans need me because I'm the only one who's from the 19th century who can tell you, make you look at what you actually, the amazing thing you've created.
But there are plenty of qualified people who never applied for a job.
That's right. Yeah, which is cultural. They didn't get the message. Remember, the key point in the middle of the book is the Crimean War, where the Charge of the Light Brigade is based on a miscommunication sent down the line that wasted hundreds of people's lives. You know, that's the joke episode in the middle, and it's in movie form, but it's being broadcast on television. See, he's got the theater, he's got the movie, he's got TV, multi-layered thing.
So Joseph Campbell is all right for a foreign speaking person?
Yes. It should be a skeleton key to Finnegans Wake for anybody not English.
Forget about it if we're...
Yeah, because Campbell is a discredited scholar in the sense that people don't... His is so simple. For those who get familiar with the Wake. There's so many other books done and a greater work and more knowledge. Campbell was a genius for beginning to take on. Can you imagine nobody knew how to handle this and he goes in there by himself for 5 years and he comes up with something. That was pretty amazing. We've got the benefit of this. I mean, I can go through this book asleep because oh yeah, there's all the stuff right here. But this is based on many scholars that come after him. So an informed person involved with the Wake knows not to take scholars seriously and is going to take advantage of the later developments because a lot of information came out. Even Ellman had to update his biography. The fact that Lewis was involved with Joyce, nobody knew that till the 80s, say. And that was a key guy.
Eric McLuhan's book is due out next year.
97 supposedly, but it's a UT press.
Tell them the main insight of that book.
Well, I'm following the Eric McLuhan school of thought, which he developed, and he's the scribe who worked out his father's ideas. I mean, you can get McLuhan's book, War and Peace in the Global Village, which came out in 1968, and it has the 10 Thunder chart, early version. That was a guide to a book he was going to put out. The book didn't get put out in the late 60s, so he floundered for 10 years, and then when his father died, he had to get a gig, so to speak. He was a teacher, but he finally had to get his PhD done. So in 82, he did his PhD, and it's just an expansion of the chart put out in late 60s. So that book is called, what do you want?
Yeah, that's it, Manipulating Thunder.
Yeah, so Marshall made a breakthrough on that, and Eric did the legwork, because Marshall's running around the world speaking and doing all this thing. So he put together his father's information, plus his own expert. I mean, in terms of Finnegans Wake per se, literally, Marshall would nod to his son as the expert, you know what I mean? But that's because Eric was really digging and did the legwork. Marshall, it was tough even to get Marshall to write a book, since he was a talker and a modern media communicator. He loved being in Annie Hall. He said, I want to get more movies, you know, that's a new, more modern medium, you know?
So his father, was it McLuhan?
Yeah, he died.
Of all people to have text written from by a pompous asshole like Woody Allen. And he put him through like 9 takes.
That's right.
And then he went back the next day, and I don't know what happened, but that was the last day of McLuhan's life.
No, the movie was done in 77. He died in 1980.
Oh, really? Are you sure?
Yeah. I was there. I killed him. I know when I did it.
I read the book over in...
But you're on the right track. Well, let's take Charles.
question.
No, take Charles' statements metaphorically. Woody did kill Marshall because Marshall wanted to do more, and Woody said, get out of here. I got you once. I haven't got time to do 9 takes. In that sense, he killed his movie Hollywood career. Okay?
It must be wrong, because it said he died the next day.
No, that's stupid. Okay.
I want to back up.
Yeah.
Maybe not the plan words. You said something about a ship and a wake, and did you say something about the Irish wake? You know, that maybe in the title.
Yes, the Finnegan's Wake's not only a song, it's the Irish wake itself, right? Which is a key cliche thing that he makes archetypal and reflects tribal rituals all through all society. And he used James Fraser's book, The Golden Bough, for specifics on that.
So could we say that maybe he was referring to the Irish wake?
Oh, he believed, that's what I wanted to bring. Here's the amazing thing. You go to page 293 with the diagram, the central image, right? The 2 circles with that overlapping area. Joyce realized that he could make a whole universe out of 2 words. The 2 words are that circle and that circle. They overlap with a residue that kind of bridges the gap between them. But take these 2 circles as 2 words, or Shem and Shan, or East and West, the basic dialectic, which you could say was from Hegel, all right? And he found that the interesting part was the interval, the overlap where there was shared situation. So that's the cliche shared bonding, or agreed upon part between 2 incompatible worlds, or two meanings, 2 incompatible meanings of one situation. So therefore, any 2 words can trigger off any other 2 words in a language. So every theme possible that we can imagine, including our life on Saturn, say in 500 years, we will find references to it in here. Because any 2 words, in the beginning was a word, evokes the whole history of humanity, or in occult terms, the Akashic records. So you're right, of course, any theme you want in there. But, you know, that means the book is like a blinding light, you know what I mean? But then you try to figure out how to make use of it in particulars. And you can do the content, or you can do the formal level, like realizing this is describing a TV experience. And you can study how he took you look at your TV and look at the wake, and you're looking at your TV and you go, oh, it's like those little dots on the mesh of the TV image are like all these little dots as words. He's showing me a painting. So you can look at the book on the form level in relation to other media and get meaning out of it, temporary meaning, as well as looking at all the little cultural meanings that are referenced. He's doing both. He's oscillating back and forth. Oh, no, this guy hasn't said something. Yes. Go ahead.
I just wanted to mention that those intersecting circles in sacred geometry is known as a Vesca-Pisces. You probably know that.
Yes, and that's a very archetypal, resonant image. Everything goes back to that.
Yeah,
and he knew that. You know?
I was wondering about your if you could make a statement on his knowledge of this.
Right.
And also these other sacred mandalas that were discovered that contain the tree of life, you know.
Have you read Bill Frisell's? Are you quoting Bill Frisell's book?
Well, yeah, I got a lot from that. It's from Dromville's work, actually.
Right. Now, here's the thing. The best scholar, there's a new book out called Coming Into Being by William Irwin Thompson. Has anybody here heard of William Irwin Thompson? Yeah. You know, the time bodies take the light and that. Well, if you look at his mid-80s book, 1985, he makes a big deal out of Finnegan's Wake as the end point of the Atlantic cultural ecology. And he said we were moving into Pacific shift in the middle 80s, into the Pacific cultural ecology. He's now changed because the wall went down, which surprised him, and he shifted it. But the point is, he saw Finnegan's Wake as a key marker point to the future. So he is now have a book out, a new book, which is lectures he gave at the Cathedral of St. John Divine in New York for 3 years, explaining Finnegan's Wake within the insights of the time-falling bodies and the Vesica. That's his key reference point. So that he has already written the book. Whatever I would say, he has emphasized that level of meaning and developed a whole history of consciousness using McLuhan and Finnegan's Wake and the Bill Frisell occult version of that. It's very good. And he's explaining Finnegan's Wake.
What's the name of the book?
Coming Into Being.
Who did he learn everything in that book from?
Me. No, he was able to make his adjustment from Pacific Shift to this new thing because I've been in New York for 3 years and dialoguing, and I knew he was a closet McLuhanite, and I confronted on him because when I brought McLuhan up in the first lectures, I was later told when I had lunch with him, Bob, he said, Bob, everybody's complaining about you. They're saying, why is this guy bringing up McLuhan? And I said to Bill, well, you know that you're a closet McLuhanite. You even met McLuhan. He says, I know. He says, but Americans don't know anything about McLuhan. Now that was in 92, 93, before Wired brought back the resurgence popular interest in McLuhan. I mean, he tells in the middle 80s, he went and taught at the Department of Communications, which was the field marshal basically started, in the University of Hawaii, and he brought up the name McLuhan, and nobody in the class ever heard of McLuhan, well, the professor knew, but he was embarrassed because he never told them. So in the middle 80s, McLuhan was gone from the cultural memory, but through Speed Up, he was retrieved. So Bill thought, still thinking those terms, he says, I can't mention McLuhan to these people. They don't know what it is. And so I said, well, I'll gradually work it in. So after 3 years, everybody, when Bill Thompson read the foreword to his book, he made a big tribute to McLuhan, and everybody looks at me and goes, You know, the point is that after 3 years, they began to see that McLuhan was the basis of a lot of Thompson's work. But what's good is he relates it back to the biological yogic tradition of meditation and enlightenment, and that ancient goddess culture, the old religion. So you've got a combination of McLuhan and Sri Aurobindo, and with McLuhan is in between. And Gerry's saying, yes, it was due to me refamiliarizing with Bill with the McLuhan and reminding him and clarifying some points that gave him the confidence to emphasize McLuhan in this new book. And also because of the McLuhan popular retrieval of McLuhan, like symbolized by what Gerry's doing, people are interested in McLuhan. Bill, being a contrarian, is mad at Wired magazine for hoiking up that part of McLuhan, so he's on an agenda to change the image of McLuhan. So he's just got a new axe to grind. But it's a good book.
What's the correct spelling of his last name?
T-H-O, Thompson?
Yeah.
T-H-O-M-P.
It's
S-O-N.
T-H-O-M-P.
Yeah.
Joyce was greatly influenced by Bruno and
Yes.
with
Yeah.
that circle there.
Yes. Which Bruno anticipated the Zen insight of the opposites, the yin-yang of opposites.
Right.
Yes.
Talking about just the evolution of consciousness and things like that. I've done a lot of work just on websites and interactive and stuff, and I'd like to hear, and actually interestingly on there's a huge amount of pranksterism.
Yes.
And humor and just an infinite array of
it's Finnegan's Wake. Now maybe you came in late. The article, we have an article on Joyce and the hypertext that you might have missed if you came in late.
I grabbed it, but I haven't time.
Yeah, but that, okay, go on.
But I'm just curious to, for you to talk about a little bit, Joyce vis-a-vis the internet, vis-a-vis our evolution as a species with technology, this new synthesis of consciousness, and what you think that's going to influence.
The internet is a telephone. In a sense, you can interact. You couldn't talk back to your book. Generally, the last 300 years, it would talk to you and you'd be passive. The telephone comes in, and the telephone is interactive, so people could communicate, and you'd have to give and take. Remember, the reason the print culture, the Gutenberg galaxy from, say, 1500 to 1850 was so stiff and rigid because it was a conditioned one-way communication, which is an inevitable result of the effect of printed book culture. So you bring in the electric culture, you start to get interactiveness, and it's not a one-way song. People start to dialogue. So you get on page 52, in the middle if you want to see it, television kills telephony in Brothers Broil. There's the Shem and Sham conflict, but he's also saying it's not just anthropomorphic, it's two media. Television killing telephony. And he says, our eyes demand their turn. How would the eyes demand their turn? They'd have to revitalize the book itself. And then Joyce says, or whoever the voice is, says, let them be seen, let the eyes be seen. He countered the interactive acoustic reality of telephone and television with the retrieval of the eye. That's part of the agenda here. Now, when you have an interactive medium like speech or telephone, then there is a self-consciousness that enters into it and room for irony. It's hard to explain irony immediately when you're reading it because you can't hear the tone. The guy has to describe. He said angrily, you know what I mean? And then you
amount of space in the internet.
Yeah.
So enough people doing that, it will crash.
I see. It's not that the telephone companies will stop it.
Exactly.
You mean it just tech.
Overload.
But what if we can develop technologies, maybe crash for a while, and then 5 years later get new fiber optics?
This is a person that's going to to cause the first major
Yeah.
where it crashes.
In other words, it'll be a virtual crash, which will be an interesting bomb versus the atomic bomb.
Secondly, these people that we've talked about here, the Yates, these are the people who post, like, at the end of where the symbolists and the existentialists begin a dialogue. And the symbolist said, a great piece of art inspires and instructs mankind. And the existentialist said, no, it's the artist who makes the piece of art that instructs mankind. And by that, they were trying to decide what was the most effective version of gnosis for the transmission of the energy. And basically what a lot of them seemed to decide in the end was that it was in the passing and in the wake, as you might say, the wake, like in the boat.
Yeah.
Again, the passing of great enlightened souls and their message that in time leads to the lifting of things. It's not the direct thing. It's not like in the direct contact in the sense of the art or just the pure symbol. It's the idea of the contact with the consciousness.
Well, you mean the effect. It's the effect of it.
Well, in a sense, but more in the case of like tonight, we're all interacting with you, Bob, and we're getting something out of it. But we probably won't appreciate what's here until the next time or at some other point when it's not the end, the situation's past. When we appreciate that piece of art by Picasso that break through with Cubism, he's already onto another phase, or he's already dead, as he is now in this case. Okay, the effect of the passing, the gnosis happens most effectively when it happens in passing, and people are able to go back at their own pace.
On my chart here, which is based on the 5 members of the family, one of the categories I do the last 250 years, it's called anthropomorphic, sociological, psychological, culture lag. The lag factor is what you're saying. So what's the point of bringing up the lag factor in relation to what we're saying?
Well, like we're talking about McLuhan.
Yeah.
McLuhan, in order to keep the purity of his teachings, he had to go into relative obscurity for a period.
A kind of passing.
Which kind of passing, right? Because if he stayed in that, then he would never have that passing, he would never have that effect to become this thing that then would invisibly draw.
So it's natural to have a sine wave of a great life's effect. Up and then down, and then later up again.
Right, like the same thing with Finnegan's Wake. Like the effects that it had have been continuous since its publication. As more people become aware of the effect that it had on other people whose art has affected them, the effect goes backwards, like following the wake.
Now, Marc, that means it's the true unconscious of our time. See, that's what's real within language or within culture and all the artifacts.
Well,
that's
maybe less than the unconscious. It's a graphic and verbal description or an alphabet, phonetic alphabet, or whatever you want to call it, description of the subconscious.
Yes.
Not the unconscious.
But it was so modern, it became part of the unconscious itself.
Oh, no, it draws upon the elements of the unconscious. But my point being, as being the subconscious, another term that they use in science for the subconscious is the transliminal consciousness. It's the thing that brings you across the line. When you decide to pick something up.
That interval between the 2 circles.
You think I'm going to pick something up, and you reach out and you just grab it. You don't think like all these muscles have to contract and do whatever. But the symbol of the communication causes the event to happen.
Right.
Like the picture that he showed us of the 2 circles. That's the proof, the drawing from Euclid's first book on mathematics and geometry. That thing shows us the golden mean. The golden mean was considered by Pythagoras to be the central philosophical lesson that human beings were supposed to become aware of. The relationship between man and nature was similar to the relationship between God and man.
Yeah.
And this is in various forms. Everything from symbols like the tree of life, or the growth of a rose bush, or any number of these principles and these proportions are explained to us. And it's only in us realizing that these things are effects, as you said, caused by the passing of some other enlightenment or some other form of consciousness, is that we're able to then get enough reflection to say, oh, okay, then if this is the case, then it must follow suit that the wake is like you're saying, this wake was inspired by Joyce's interactions with these other people. So now,